Hey there, it's Mandy from Mandy Marie Art. I'm back with another Copic swatch video. This video is part 2 of a 2-part series where I'm swatching the remaining blue Copic inks I have in my personal collection. So again, I have 32 of the 35 blue Copic inks, and in this video, I'm going to cover the last 14 of those inks. If you're wanting to see video 1, go check that out. That has the first 18 inks. As a reminder, if you want to see swatches of all the Copic colors in my personal collection in real time with me, go ahead and hit that subscribe button below and you'll be notified the second I upload a new video. I really love these blue hues, so I'm excited to show you the rest of them and what I have in my collection, so let's dig in. All right, first up is B37, which is Antwerp Blue. So 1 drop of color there with a little drop of 91% ISO just to get it moving on the paper. There is some initial staining on the Yupo paper right where I dropped the ink, and there are definitely a lot of pink undertones with this color that are going to show up around the edges. So not a lot, they're really subtle. You could probably easily wipe some of them up, but they're there. In terms of texture, it's not super thick, it's a pretty smooth ink. Next up is B39, which is Prussian Blue. Initial staining ring on the paper, so that is there underneath the ink. Again, more of those pink undertones showing up around the edges as it dries. So you can kind of see that throughout along the edges. Probably something that you could easily clean up with like a cotton swab, something like that, but there are some pink undertones there. Next is B41, which is powder blue. Powder blue is a very soft color. Stains the paper. And then again, some more of those pink undertones. Kind of gives it a little of a lavender feel with those undertones. Not super gummy for a light color, but lots of, again, purple and pink along the edges, pink undertones bleeding out there. Next, I'm going to show you B45 Smoky Blue. I showed this in the last video because I kind of got out of order with the numbering. I'm not sure what was happening. I think I must have been drunk behind the wheel there. So I'm going to do that again. B45 Smoky Blue. Some staining on the paper with that B42 again. Kind of has a little bit of a purple feel to it. There's some pink undertones that bleed out along the side. Not super gummy or tacky in terms of texture. And it doesn't have that initial like staining drop. It just kind of stains the paper throughout. But again, some pink undertones around the side there. Next is B52 Soft Greenish Blue. Again, as the name implies, there's a little bit of green to it. Has a little bit of that initial staining on the paper from where the drop was, but overall not too bad. It can be easily covered up with the ink. Around the edges, it gets a green grayish kind of color to it, so those are kind of what bleeds out in terms of undertones. You'll see again some of that green and gray just along those edges. Can get a little tacky or gummy around the edges, but overall pretty smooth. Next is B60, which is pale blue gray. More of a lavender feel to it, even though it's a blue. Very soft, gentle color, doesn't really stain the paper to start, so works pretty well as like a colored blending option along the edges of paintings is how I usually use it. Not a lot of undertones, but it is gummy. There is some texture to it. Again, like with some of those lighter colors, they get a little gummy. Next is B63, which is light hydrangea. Light hydrangea has a bit of pink staining to the paper right where I put that ink down, but you can kind of smooth it out. It's again, that softer kind of purple hue to it. Gets a little gummy. And again, there's just a little bit of pink there right in the center where I dropped the ink down. Next color is B66, that's Clematis. Again, purple hue to it. Stains the paper pink at the bottom there. You can kind of see that as I move the ink around. Slightly gummy, not a ton of texture. But again, there's that pink kind of staining happening below it. Next, and also as it's drying, there is some pink halos kind of forming or undertones bleeding out there. Next is B69 Stratospheric Blue. Pretty intense, almost like an ultramarine color. Could even fall in like that fluorescent category with how intense the color is. Overall, there's a little bit of staining where I initially dropped the ink, but it's a pretty stable color, not a lot of bleeding happening here. It can build up and get thick there, so in terms of texture, it would be a very good buildable color. All right, next up we have B79, which is Iris. Iris has, you know, some of that purple kind of hue to it. It will definitely have some pink halos, undertones bleeding out, and you can kind of start to see that around the edges. Not a lot, but there's some. Next is B91, which is pale grayish blue. And as the name implies, there's a bit of gray to it, so it is a little kind of dull, if you will. It's a very light color, stable overall, doesn't stain the paper a lot. There is a bit of like tackiness or gumminess, simply because it is that lighter shade, and they do, like I mentioned before, get a little gummy. But again, pretty stable, little gray kind of undertone to it. Next is B93, which is light crockery blue. Again, has some gray to it. A little bit of staining on the paper, but not really, not much. Pretty stable color, not a lot of undertones bleeding through. It is a bit gummy, which again is just a lighter color. So there's a bit of texture or gumminess to it. Next up is B95, which is light grayish cobalt. Again, as the name implies, there's gray to it, so it does have a bit of a gray feel. Very smooth, pretty stable color, not much in terms of undertones or bleeding there, and not much for texture. Pretty smooth. The next color is B97, which is night blue. Not much in terms of staining on the paper. Fairly stable color. Builds up on the edges pretty nice, so you could build this color up, but there's not a lot of texture or gumminess to it. And the last color that I have, which is a probably a fan favorite in the alcohol ink painting world is B99, which is agate. Now this one I use quite a bit to build up. I think it has a nice texture to it. Not much in terms of the initial staining on the paper. It's a pretty stable color in terms of undertones. I don't really see a lot bleeding out. Maybe a little bit of gray in there, which kind of gives it the effect of like a grayish green just along some of those parts, but not much. Overall, pretty stable. All right, one last look at the second half of the blue Copic ink series in my personal collection. Lots of variety and colors to pick from in the blue series from Copic. I hope you enjoyed this video, and that's it from me for today. As another reminder, I'm going to be releasing a series of videos where I swatch all of the Copic inks that I have in my personal collection. So if you're wanting to see all of the Copic color swatches in real time with detailed information about each color, go ahead, hit that subscribe button below, and you'll be notified the second I upload a new video.